Thanks, everybody. Can you guys hear me in the back? Yes. All right. My name's Hugh. I am an alcoholic. Hey, Hugh. Let me start, before I get to the other part, I'm going to echo what Josh said. The cameras are here just to film me. Your anonymity is protected. Do not be concerned about that. If anybody has any concerns, please voice them, but your anonymity is being protected. I was going to say something else, but Josh brought up something that I wanted to start somewhere else, but Josh brought up something else about First Call. First Call is everything that he said it was, and it's at least one thing more that has always been important to me, and it provides a service that no other organization that I know of in the country, or excuse me, in the city or even in this country provides as well as they do. And that is they provide services to people who are close to someone who's suffering. The families, the children, the spouses, those that are close, they provide programs to help those folks. They provide a program that's called How to Cope that I have sent dozens of people to. And those people weren't suffering themselves from addiction. They were suffering from somebody close to them who was suffering. And I know what audience I'm talking to. So when I say this next part, you'll understand what I'm saying. Those people went to How to Cope to figure out how to make the other person stop. And when they got there, they were told they couldn't make the other person stop. What they could do was fix themselves. And it's a great program. Sorry, but I needed to put that commercial in. When I started preparing for this talk, I hesitate to say this today, but I'm going to. When I started to prepare for this talk, I was in Hawaii. And I liked the weather there more than it was just a little warmer, a little sunnier. But I'm here now, and I'm glad to be here. But while I was there, the reason I was there, one of the main reasons I was there, is I was visiting my daughter, my middle daughter, who lives there, and with her granddaughter, with my granddaughter. And when I started thinking about what happened so many years ago, I thought I would share that with you. When my daughter was then 20. It was after her sophomore year in college. She came home for the summer, and she knew I was having a meeting on Monday night. I go to a rotating Monday night meeting that meets in houses, and the meeting was going to be at my house that night. And earlier that evening, she came up to me and she said, and she knew I was having the meeting, so she knew she had to get the hell out of the house. She came up to me and says, "What are you going to be talking about tonight at the meeting?" I thought it was kind of strange, but she knew all about the program from me talking about it. So I said, "We're going to be talking about the 9th step." And that was the end of the conversation. She went off, and about 45 minutes before the meeting started, she came down, getting ready to leave the house, and she handed me an envelope with a letter in it. She said, I want you to read this tonight at the meeting, but I don't want you to read it before the meeting. Something told me that was something I should be doing. So at the meeting, I read the letter, and I want to share it with you. And I'm going to warn you ahead of time that I can't get through it straight. It's too much. It's dated July of '94. Dear members of Monday Night AA, I know that in your organization, one of the steps to recovery is going back to those you love and have hurt and asking for forgiveness. to make amends for things that you can't take back, actions that can't be reversed, or words that can't be erased from one's mind. I have been approached by someone following in those steps, that step's instructions. It was my father. At the time, I merely blew it off. Apology accepted, no big deal. But now I would like to take the chance to respond to that step. There's so much I've realized I want to acknowledge from observing my father's efforts. First, I'd like to say thank you to my father. Thank you for realizing, even as low as you have gotten, that something in your life had to change, that it was time to seek help. Thank you for helping break the cycle. Although my sister and I had seen him drink excessively, he has set a more penetrating example by his sobriety. And although he watched his father literally drink himself to his deathbed, my younger brother will never have to go through such an experience. As great and wide as my father's change in lifestyle has in turn changed those in his life, there are others cannot be recognized and praised enough. Those others are you, and I'm including you in this. Those others are you, members of Alcoholics Anonymous. Until recently, I thought my father's change was solely his own. But as you all well know, that's where the desire to change has to begin. But it is all of you who were the support, the encouragement, and the counselors who helped my father not only throughout the worst of it, but through 10 years of sobriety. 10 and some years ago, my father decided to start our lives anew, and every day since then has been a blessing with incredible happiness. Happiness that without your group would be lost to a bottle. I warned you. I can't thank you enough. I know none of you by face or name yet. I have an enormous amount of respect and gratitude to you for first seeking help for yourselves and for taking a terrible habit and using it as a way to share and help others go through similar experiences. Only through your own experiences, as terrible as they may have been, could you grasp for someone slipping by letting them know they are not alone, that what they are feeling can't be solved by drinking, because as much as I'd like to help an alcoholic or drug addict from returning to their habit, or as much knowledge as a psychiatrist has about addiction, only a fellow AA member can show by example. Congratulations to you all. You are the top, the elite, for not only helping yourselves, but also helping others whose situations only you could understand. I always believe that once you've been sober for some time, then AA is no longer necessary. But I no longer feel that way. That was my daughter saying that, and I'm saying it too, right now. None of you will ever know the extent to which AA has affected my life and the lives of my family, nor the millions of others. AA is the most beneficial organization in the world, in my perspective. Its structure, members, and effectiveness amazes me. And it is thanks to you that I can say my father is an alcoholic. And I have never been more proud of him in my life. Sincerely. I told you I couldn't get through it. It's because of this organization, this fellowship, that I'm standing here now. It's because of this fellowship that I was in Hawaii with my daughter, with my granddaughter, with my son, who's 37 years old and has never seen me drink. I was there with my sister, who'd watched me drink even longer than my daughters had. I was able to take that trip because I stopped drinking, not by myself, but because of people like you. And I did it one day at a time. I made it that trip also because since that day of sobriety, I've had a successful professional career. I'm a lawyer, I'm a mediator, I'm a collaborative divorce attorney. Because of my sobriety, I have a great relationship with my family. My oldest daughter, who many years later, called me on the phone because she had a problem. And and I'd known she'd been struggling for some time. But one day she called me on the phone and she said, "Dad, I need help." And as I was driving over to her house, I did one of the smartest things that I've done in my life. And that was, "Hugh, you've got no business going over there trying to help your daughter get sober. You are way too close to this." And I called a woman that I know in the program, and she met me there. And my daughter's been sober. Well, she's been sober most of the time since then. How about that? She's sober today. I have a close relationship with my four grandchildren, all of whom were on the islands with me. My oldest grandchild is 20 years old, and he's now studying abroad in Scotland. And this old man's going to Scotland to visit him while he's there. And it's only because of my sobriety that can happen, but it's also only because of my sobriety that some 20-year-old kid's going to want his granddad coming to visit him in Scotland instead of partying all the way through Scotland. I have a 16-year-old granddaughter here. I have a 17-year-old granddaughter in Hawaii. I also have a 3-year-old granddaughter who lives in Portland. I would have not any kind of relationship with any of those people, but for my sobriety, and my sobriety, I think, is by means of Alcoholics Anonymous. Sobriety has given me great joy, and I am very grateful for this. However, it's brought me some other things. While I was on this trip, at the end of this trip, a very dear friend of mine who is also a close friend of Welcome House, I found out that he has cancer, and he's very ill right now. And I was there for him. I can be there for him because of my sobriety. I don't have to go hide in a bottle, and he hasn't chosen to go hide in a bottle. I could be there for him, and I could talk to him, and I didn't have to tell him everything's going to be okay, because I don't know what's going to be okay. But I know that I love him, and I can say I love him, and I can be there to help him, to listen to him. And it's only because of the program that this gentleman can say to me, "Hugh, I'm scared." Now, anybody who's just been told that they have cancer, if they're not scared, they're either really, really drunk or out of their mind. But there's not a whole lot of men that are willing to say that. And then because of sobriety, he can say that. One of the biggest things that struck me about the first meeting I went to, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a little bit. One of the first things that struck me was I'm sitting in this meeting, and there was a Monday night, much like this one, only a long time ago, and it was in the basement of Don R.'s house. And there was a bunch of men in there, about 15, all of them who looked and were successfully living their lives. They had good families that loved them. They were respected. They had good jobs. They took care of them, took care of their families. And these men were sitting around talking about their thoughts, talking about their feelings, talking about being afraid, talking about insecurities, talking about, pardon me for saying this, talking about shit that I'd never heard men talk about before. And I was amazed at this, but they were open about it. They talked about it, and they talked about it because they knew and had found out what it took me a long time to find out. There was strength in that. There's a lot of strength in that. In fact, there's all the strength in the world in that. But back to my friend. I felt and I feel very sad for my friend. And I feel that sadness as equally as intense as the joy that I felt with my family. But I can't change that, and I don't want to change that. But I don't have to hide from it. I don't have to crawl in the bottle to do that. I've got a lot of connections with this place. I know one of the men who founded this place. His name was John C. And John was a crusty old guy, to say the least. And he'd grumble and he'd growl, but when it came down to it, he put his heart where it needed to be when he and some other people started this place. And years ago, I was in a law office not very far from here. It was actually at 26th and Holmes. And there was a gentleman in that office who was a great lawyer, a great trial lawyer, and he was suffering from this disease, and he knew John. And John came over one Saturday, and John and I had talked beforehand, and we had decided to sort of have a mini intervention with Tom. So he came over one Saturday, and I really expected John to just growl at the guy and just tell him what he needed to do. But John was smart enough to know that telling any alcoholic what he needed to do wasn't going to do anybody any good. Well, it might have done John some good and get it off of his chest. Might do me some good if I tell somebody what's wrong with them, but it ain't going to help them. And he got through to Tom. And that day, I got the opportunity to take Tom on what I remember to be the 45-minute drive to Valley of Hope. And I'll tell you, it was one of the longest 45 minutes of my life, because I didn't know for sure whether he was going to open the door and roll out at any point or not. But he didn't, and I got him to Valley of Hope, and he checked in. Unfortunately, at least at that time, he almost beat me back to Kansas City. But eventually, Tom did get sober, and Tom did live at Welcome House, and he lived at this place for at least 5 years. And he died a sober man. He's been dead for a while now. He was a great lawyer and a good guy. I knew the first director at this place, Mike Leahy. I knew the next director was a guy named Greg Rourke. And Greg and I were good friends. Greg had a successful career selling, I'm not sure, I can't remember now. But he was a hell of a salesman. And at some point when he was about 55 years old, he decided I don't want to do this anymore. And Leahy had died, and he decided to apply for this job, although he was a long time in recovery. He had no experience in this, and they hired Greg. He became the director at Welcome House, and he did a heck of a job with this place. Greg and I and another guy in recovery spent 2 weeks also in Hawaii, playing golf years later. That was a wonderful trip. Unfortunately, Greg's not with us anymore. And now your current director, Jamie, is doing a bang-up job, and Josh is helping him out, and this is wonderful. But the point of all of this is this. You folks out there, you gentlemen out there, are the benefactors of some hard work and a lot of an imagination of some men who, against incredible odds, got this place started 50 years ago. This place started without any government money, without any help from any place else. They just got their own money together, and for a long time, and I'm not sure if it's different now or not, for a long time they didn't even take government money. Not anymore, not still. I mean, there aren't any places like this, or very many of them. You guys are lucky. Now, I've talked a lot about this place and some other things. I want to tell you how I got here. I grew up on the other side of the state. I grew up in St. Charles County, Missouri, out on the farm. I grew up with my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, my uncle, my mom and dad, and my 2 sisters. And I was always told, as a kid, we were always told, the kids, my 2 sisters and I were always told that the reason why we were at that farm was because my grandmother was getting, well, both grandparents, but my grandmother was running the household. She was getting old and couldn't take care of all of the things that need to be done on a farm, which means basically at that time, well, let's put it to you this way. My mom used to get up. When she was up, she was still in the kitchen doing something when I went to bed at night. And that's what growing up on the farm that many years ago was like. But I was told that we were there because my mother had 7 or 8 sisters or siblings. But I was told that the reason we were there was because Mom was the only one that was available at that time to come back and run the household, manage the household. Well, that wasn't true. The reason we were there was, and I didn't know this until years later. The reason we were there was that we were living in Florida. My dad was a salesman for Quaker Oats Company. I was 9 months old. My mom was pregnant with my little sister. My older sister had been born like 3 months premature, and she was still recovering, trying to get herself to be sustainable, which she has been. There was 2 kids and 1 expected, and my dad got fired. And guess why he got fired? Might have had something to do with alcohol. But I didn't know that for years. I can't imagine people lying about such things. Can you? Years later, a few years later, when I was about 11, 12 years old, I went to my family, my mom, dad, and my 2 sisters and I went to Chicago to visit my grandfather, my dad's dad. And while we were there, I remember being in a hotel room that was a company next to the one that my parents was in, and we were going to go over to my grandfather's house, or no, excuse me, apartment. And when we went over to Mom and Dad's room, my dad was drunk. And Mom was trying to get him sober enough to get out. And she said something to us kids like, "Look at your dad, he's drunk, can't you do something about that?" Now, whether she said anything like that or not, I couldn't tell you, but that's what I heard. And I made a decision at that point that I was going to treat my dad like shit for the rest of my childhood or for the rest of my life. And somehow that logic was supposed to make him stop drinking. And again, I suspect nobody out here thinks that worked, because it didn't. What it did do was ruin any relationship that I had with my dad. And he died at age 51 when I was only 20 years old. And he died from alcohol. And I carried that resentment against him for a long time after he died. I asked my mom once, I'm going all over the place, but bear with me. I asked my mom one time, I said, "How long did Dad stay sober? Did he stay sober? How long did he stay?" Actually, we called him Pop. "How long did Pop stay sober?" And she said, "He never stayed sober." And I said, "Wait a minute, there was this one time when he went to the state mental hospital, because at that time there were no treatment centers. So he went to Macon, to the state mental hospital, and he was up there for 30 days. And I remember every weekend, one of us kids would go up with Mom to visit him." And she said, "He never did stay sober." And I said, "What about when he went to the state mental hospital?" She said, "I took him booze on the weekends." Now, he was there at that hospital because he was driving my mom crazy enough that she got him to finally do something about his drinking. But when he got there, she brought him booze on the weekends. My mom was a supreme enabler, but my mom was also, whatever good I am is because of her. She was a loving, kind person with good values. She didn't know what to do with an alcoholic husband. Well, she knew what to do with him, but it wasn't the healthy thing to do. And later, even when I started drinking, I used to go home to visit her when she was still living in St. Charles County. And even with that long history, I knew when I got to my mom's apartment, there would be a refrigerator full of beer. For me, she didn't drink it. Anyway, I digress, and I'm going to keep digressing for sure. When I was so this happens in Chicago when I'm about 11 years old. A few years later, I'm 15 years old, having sworn that the one thing in life that I was not going to be was my dad. I'm 15 years old, and my 3 buddies and I decide we're going to go to the drive-in theater, and I sneak into the barn where we parked our car, this family car, because I knew my old man hid a bottle there. And I stole the bottle, and we took it to the drive-in, and that was the first time I got drunk. And I liked it. I liked it enough that I kept doing it for as many times as I could when I was in high school, and I got in trouble. I got arrested for being in possession of alcohol as a minor. I once, when I was 17 years old, senior in high school, the night before my senior prom, I drove my car into a ditch. I don't remember driving my car into a ditch, but I drove my car into a ditch. And ironically, I drove my car into a ditch about 100 yards away from where my dad had driven his car into a ditch years before. I didn't make the connection, by the way. After high school, I went off to college. And when I got to college, it was the late 60s, and there was an opportunity to add things besides alcohol to my appetite. And I partook in those. I smoked a lot of dope and did other drugs as well. During that time, I don't take credit for this, but I'm lucky. My dad must have been a smart guy, because I got a good brain. And I could do all of that and still get decent enough grades to continue on. After 3 years of college, I took the LSAT and got into law school. In the meantime, I was dating this exotic Hawaiian woman, and somehow she got pregnant. And we got married, and that daughter I was talking about earlier, who had called me on the phone a few years ago with her own problem, was the product of that. We were together for 10 years. After law school, I look back on this and I find it hard to believe. I did not drink a whole lot in law school, mostly because there wasn't enough money. I didn't have enough money. Everything was towards the education. But when I drank, believe me, I drank. But I didn't drink that much in law school. But when I got out of law school, the money was there, and the drinking increased, and the drinking increased and increased and increased. And what started out being a successful legal career, I started off working for a respectable trial lawyer's firm in Kansas City. From there, I went to the Attorney General's office of the state of Missouri, was Assistant Attorney General. From there, I went to a small law firm to start a litigation department in their small firm. About this time, myself and my wife and I, we had a tumultuous relationship, contributed to a great deal by my drinking, but that wasn't the only cause of it, but it was enough of a cause of it that we ended up getting divorced. And I'm 30 years old. I'm a practicing lawyer. I've got decent income, and I'm single. Imagine what I did then. Which bar is the closest? That's where I went. And the career went downhill from there. Over the next 5 years, I went from one legal position to another legal position to another legal position, till the last one I had was working for this legal clinic, which was a horrible job, and it paid horrible, and I couldn't keep that job. I got let go from that job. At that point, I had my two daughters. By that time, we had the second daughter, and before the divorce, obviously. And the second daughter is the one that lives in Hawaii. I had two daughters whom I cared about. I didn't act like I cared about them. I didn't act like a father, for sure. I drove with those two girls in my car under the influence of alcohol hundreds of times. I'm just lucky that I didn't hurt them or other people. Although I do remember one night when they weren't in the car, I was driving down the road and I was gone, completely gone, and I was about 6 blocks from the apartment I lived in. And I realized, and I was lost. I didn't know, all of a sudden I just didn't know where I was. And then I found my way back to my apartment, and I woke up the next morning and I started thinking, I just had a horrible dream last night. It was that I was driving home and I was hitting cars, bouncing off of cars on both sides of the street. And I looked out my window and it wasn't a dream. All those cars were parked, nobody got hurt, but just by the grace of God that happened. So at that point in my life, when the legal career was gone, I had some relationship with my daughters. I had a woman who I had dated for a short period of time who I really, really loved. And I cared about her, and she informed me that she wasn't going to hang around while I killed myself drinking. And I didn't want that to happen. I was also seeing a psychologist at that time, and I was somewhat honest with him about how much I drank. And at some point, he said to me, I'm not treating you anymore. I'm not doing you any good as long as you're drinking. You've got to go get into treatment. And I've said this a few hundred times, and I'm going to say it again. At that point, I knew I did not want to go to treatment because first of all, I didn't have the money to go to treatment. Secondly, I didn't want to be away for that period of time. But I knew I had to do something at that point, or he was going to quit treating me. And there were other bad things that were going to happen as well. And out of my mouth came the words, how about AA? I swear to you, I never had a thought about Alcoholics Anonymous before that moment. I don't know where those words came from, but they came out of my mouth. And the psychologist said to me, well, you can try that. And basically what he said, you can try that, but when that fails, you got to go to treatment. Well, a few days later, I went to my first AA meeting. That was April of 1984. It was coincidentally the first day it was opening day of the Kansas City Royals baseball season. The night before that was supposed to be opening day April the 5th. But on April the 5th, I found myself at Charlie Hooper's in Brookside, where the bus was supposed to take us to the game, but the game got rained out. And this is where my story falls a little flat, because there wasn't anything dramatic about my last drunk. I just drank that day, went home. The next day, something happened. I went to the baseball game, and I didn't drink that day. I can't tell you how many years it had been since I hadn't had anything to drink in a day. But I didn't have anything to drink that day. And a few days later, I found myself at my first AA Monday night meeting in Don R.'s basement. Now, I know some of you here probably are thinking, what's this guy got to offer me? I mean, he's sitting there telling me about his troubles, and my story is a whole lot more dramatic than his. The worst thing he can come up with is that he bounced off to some cars one night driving down the road. That's the best he can do. That's not the greatest drunk log I've ever heard. And you're right. I was lucky. At least I've been lucky up to this point. But all I got to offer you is my story. And you're giving me the opportunity. Me telling you the story is doing me as much good as, I hope it's doing somebody out there some good. But I'm glad that I've gotten here. I've got to tell the story. In sobriety, I married that woman that I was dating and that I loved. She gave me the son that I talked about earlier. She and I got divorced when he was about 3 years old, and she broke my heart. I was devastated, and this program saved my life a second time. I wasn't tempted to drink, but God, was I low. My pain was in my heart, was terrible. And she gave me something besides my son. She gave me when we got divorced, she insisted that I be an involved father with my son. And we have a relationship that I could never imagine. I have a fantastic relationship. When I walked into that Alcoholics Anonymous meeting that Monday night, I don't know, all those years ago, I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought, certainly I thought that, well, first of all, what I heard that meeting was a first step. Admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. When I heard that, that was the first time I had ever heard that. When I heard that, I said, yeah. I'd never thought of it that way, but it was true. And it was that thought and those men who had the courage to talk about how they felt and talk about how they got to where they were that night that kept me going to meetings for a long time. And it was only in the early days, that's all I could do. I couldn't do anything more than that. I could go to an AA meeting, I could somehow not drink in between the meetings, and then I could go to another meeting and do the next thing that was in front of me. Try to find a way to make some money. Try to take care of my children. After I got sober, I had the opportunity to raise my daughters. The one who lives in Hawaii, she lived with me her whole time in high school, and I'm very grateful for that. I've got my legal career. In my legal career, I've had an opportunity to become involved as a mediator. I started doing family mediations back 25 years ago when it was it was just brand new. I brought in some guys to do collaborative divorce, something that was unknown at that time. Helping people solve their own problems, and the only way I got there was because I was sober, but also because of the lessons that I learned in the program. I have been given so many gifts that I could not imagine. If I came to my first AA meeting thinking, gee, maybe I can not drink. If that's what I really thought, then I got 1,000 times that. I got a life I never could have imagined. And I'm so grateful for that, and I'm grateful for you guys. I'm grateful for everybody that's here tonight. I'm hoping that there's something I've said that makes some difference to you, but if it didn't make some difference to you, keep coming back anyway. And I know it's not maybe normal, but if anybody's got any comments or questions, I'm certainly, feel free to ask. Yeah.
You've been sober since '84?
Yep.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Didn't do it by myself. Thank you guys for letting me talk to you. I appreciate it.